There was no threat of default. And as often is the case in Washington, there are these faux crises that are foisted upon us, whether it was this most recent one with the potential threat of default, whether it was the fiscal cliff. The fact is, many of these things are Chicken Little-like. The sky is falling, when in fact that is not the case. And under the cover of these crises and the resolution to these crises, there's any amount of pork that gets, foisted about, and billions of our dollars get wasted under the guise of protecting us from something. And the American people are tired of it. The voters of Kentucky are tired of it. I understand exactly what polls are telling us, but you have to look at the source of those. I also see that the very man who supposedly was responsible for this hurting just received an 8-minute standing ovation when he went home to his state. The fact is, the American people want men and women to stand up and represent them, and to put their interests ahead of the party interests. Too many of the career politicians, the established politicians in Washington, on both sides of the aisle, are representing their party more than the people. And no matter what the media says, the ballot box will determine what people truly believe. Because I'll listen to the people, first of all. I will not put my party ahead of what the people want, the people who have elected me, the constituents that I'm there to represent. I am a believer in smaller government, limited government, less regulation, less taxes, because I think to have more of those things, we suffocate, as I said, the entrepreneurial spirit of this nation. It is critical that we've got to start to dial back the scale of government. We've just extended the debt limit again, somewhat indefinitely, granted only till February 7th, but with no limit to it. We have $17 trillion in debt. We have a GDP of $15.1 trillion. It is unsustainable. The path we are on financially is unsustainable. There has to be fiscal responsibility applied. There has to be common sense. These programs are going broke. They are bankrupt. When they were established, things like Social Security, things like Medicare, Medicaid, there were 7 workers contributing for everybody who was receiving. That ratio is quickly diminishing to the point that it's now less than 2 to 1. That is unsustainable. Look at the requirements for eligibility on 2 fronts, both in terms of means testing, if it comes to that, but more critically and more importantly, look at the demographics associated with it. It was, when these programs were created, the recipients, on average, lived a few years beyond the point at which they were eligible. Now they're living as long as half their lives after the point that they become eligible. Decades and decades. Syria was a perfect example, where he couldn't decide until the last minute what he believed because he wanted to side with the party, and the party wanted to go to war. The American people overwhelmingly said, we don't have any interest in this. And only when Harry Reid decided that he wasn't going to take a vote did Mitch McConnell suddenly decide that he was going to side with the American people. There's an example. Amnesty. Any number of corporate interests who line Mitch McConnell's campaign coffers are very in favor of expanding amnesty. Yet again, Mitch McConnell voted for it in 1986. He voted for it in 06. He voted for it in 07 and then changed his vote and pretended he didn't. And in fact, he was very silent this time because he's running for re-election. Because too often we have aligned ourselves with larger corporate interests, and we've done it at the expense of the people, of all communities. No, in fact, one of the reasons I got into this race is because I think the only Republican in the state of Kentucky that can lose this seat for the Republican Party is the guy who's in it. Mitch McConnell will lose this race. If indeed this is his measure of what the greatest Senate campaign is, I don't know what his measuring stick is. I think the more his people talk, the better it is for my campaign. They have not, because they're not true. When you have a 37% approval rating, think about it. From his standpoint, the only way you have to get reelected is to make the people running against you less popular than yourself. So I think we've only begun to see the tip of the iceberg. He makes these claims up, and then he runs ads about them, and I think he'll continue to do that. We will not match him dollar for dollar, nor will we try. This is not a race that is going to be purchased. He believes he can buy his seat again. I believe he's wrong. The people will decide at the ballot box who wins. He will put a 1 or a 2 in front of any number we raise. We'll need $4 to $8 million to win this race. That's what it'll take, and we need to turn the voters out. We will raise the money. I don't intend to buy it myself. And I think people who do, you could look at any number of examples in other states, in Connecticut, California, and others, where people have put pretty substantial amounts of their own fortunes into things. I think that's a mistake, because guess what? Buying your way in with your own money doesn't turn people out at the ballot box. Who says that I am so great? I mean, I've not made that claim. But the fact is, people want an alternative. And the reason Rand Paul is for me, you'll have to ask Rand. I think folks could guess as to what his aspirations might be and what avenues he thinks he needs to take in order to attain those aspirations. But here's what I'll tell you. Rand Paul is one vote. And everybody who ultimately coalesced behind him is already behind me. I have spoken to Ted Cruz. I've spoken to others. Specifically as to what they're going to do or not do, I will defer to them to make that case. Again, many of the conversations that I've had with people were had in private for a reason. They have more at play as elected officials right now than I do with respect to discussing those conversations. And out of respect for them, I'm going to defer to them as to when they choose to talk about the conversations that we've had. You can be quick to talk about who you're talking to, this or that. I think it's disadvantageous to get the cart ahead of the horse.